liver might lead to feeding abnormalities and might lead to weight loss in the mice. But these mice were really very normal except for this liver disease. Now, I mentioned that we might be able to use this mouse to look at genes that modify the course of the disease. And let me show you what I mean by that. There's a factor known as tumor necrosis factor. And this factor is one that is released by immune cells as these inflammatory cells are getting activated. And it really does some bad things throughout the body. It also does good things because it binds to receptors on tumor cells and does cause them to be killed, and so, which is how it's named out to be tumor necrosis factor. But it also just causes widespread inflammation. Now, we can test whether the action of tumor necrosis factor is playing a bad role in progression of NPC disease by simply taking mice that are already commercially available that are called TNF knockout mice. These mice make absolutely no TNF throughout their body. And now we can inject those mice with our control and NPC1 directed antisense for the various times and assess, does NPC disease progress identically with and without the TNF being present? What we found in this analysis was that when we knocked down NPC in the absence of TNF, the liver still got enlarged. The liver was still injured, so enzymes were found in the blood, and the cholesterol was still being stored. And that's not a surprise because NPC1 has disappeared, and so we are getting the primary disease phenotype. Macrophages still occurred and were lipid enlarged. But the secondary effects of the disease were attenuated. So the hepatocyte death was lessened. There were fewer inflammatory cells present. That stellate cell proliferation did not occur. And that the spread of fibrosis was lessened. And so this was, these were results that made us hopeful that if we were able to block effects of TNF, we might be able to lessen inflammation in an NPC child, since this progression was slowed down. Now, as it turns out, there is an FDA-approved therapeutic directed against TNF, and that's a therapeutic called Remicade. And it's used in a lot of different diseases where inflammation is a real problem. And so we carried out this same study, but we also simultaneously treated the mice with a mouse version of Remicade. And unfortunately, this Remicade in the mice was not very effective. And so that was a disappointment. There was a partial attenuation of the disease, but it was not really statistically significant. The company that makes Remicade and that supplied the drug to us agrees that most likely we need a smaller version of this drug that would be able to intercalate into the liver better. Our mice were treated with the Remicade prior to the NPC1 knockdown, so it was sort of the best possible case. Normally, we would have an already affected child being treated after disease had progressed. But here, the treatment was taking place even before the knockdown. And so that was very disappointing to us. Obviously, this is just we are carrying out this analysis in the liver because it is an organ that is accessible to us. If this had worked in the liver, we would be looking for therapeutics like that could cross the blood-brain barrier. We were also interested in evaluating recovery from disease. We wanted to inject mice with the NPC antisense for a long period of time, 9 to 15 weeks, to make our sick mouse. Now, the NPC NIH mouse has typically died by 11 weeks. And so Very rarely would an NPC mouse get to this stage to get this far advanced of liver disease. We are then able to stop the injections, and we anticipated that the antisense would get diluted out and go away, and that NPC1 protein could come back. And we would ask, does the liver return to normal? And this might mimic the situation where a child is now treated with a therapy that is relieving the NPC defect. How well would an organ respond to that therapy? Well, we found that after 4 weeks of recovery, the NPC1 protein is just beginning to appear. So it's at about 50% of normal. So to put that into perspective, most of us, we would consider to have 100% of NPC1 activity. And an affected child might have a very low amount of activity, from null, 0, to maybe 10%. If a parent of an NPC child who is an obligate heterozygote most likely has about 50% of NPC activity, and you're doing just fine. So we know that there's a lot of excess NPC1 there. You can exist just fine with 50% of activity. So here with 30% of activity is a pretty good amount of the NPC1 protein. The liver has, by this point, gone down to its normal size. Liver enzymes were no longer found in the blood. And so that means that the liver has actually begun to heal despite this very low amount of NPC1 protein, which is quite good news. The cholesterol storage is still present in this liver. After 9 weeks of recovery, NPC1 protein's up to normal, and the cholesterol storage has completely resolved. There are still, it still looks like a sick liver. The liver is still in the process of recovering. It took actually another, a total of 15 weeks before the hepatocyte number was back to normal, macrophages had completely gone away. The fibrosis, however, was still getting worse. So those stellate cells were still proliferating, and the fibrotic connections amongst all of those cells were still increasing. And we don't understand that. We don't know if that's because all of that lipid that's being released from the storage compartments is still activating the stellate cells, even when other aspects of NPC1 function seem to be returned to normal. The one aspect that seemed to be more of a marker of recovery was not the liver enzymes, because they returned to normal right away, but more it was the blood bile acid level, which seemed to decline along with the resolution of the cholesterol storage. And so we will be investigating whether that's a better marker of recovery than the liver enzymes. So it's all well and good to look at the liver. I look at the liver because it's an organ that I understand. I'm surrounded by liver experts in my department. It's easy to get to, whereas the brain has always been much more of a mystery to me, and it's a lot harder to get material into the brain. And so we used the liver as our trial to see if we could get this knockdown and recovery. But really what we'd like to do, and we've just begun these studies, is to knock down NPC1 in the brain, create a knockout